2017, towards the end of the year, there was a mystery film released, adapted from an Agatha Christie novel, featuring a somewhat star-studded cast, and I'm not talking about Kenneth Branagh's Murder on the Orient Express. No, today I'm talking about Crooked House, directed by Gilles Paquette-Brenner, a film that seems to have vanished almost as soon as it was released. In a way, it makes sense. It had a much smaller budget than its main competitor at the time, it had a far more limited theatrical run, and didn't receive, to my memory at least, any publicity of note. I recall seeing a poster for it somewhere online at the time, and then I promptly forgot about it. But a while back, I discovered the DVD during my continued efforts to bolster my movie collection, and was very excited to watch it. But, first things being first, I had never read the novel, so I remedied that a couple of months ago, and discovered it was excellent. Crooked House does not have the widespread name recognition to the general public that A Murder on the Orient Express does, or And Then There Were None, which probably also helped this adaptation fall into obscurity so quickly. But at the same time, that lack of general awareness allowed me to go into it with no expectations of the story, and subsequently get completely blown away by the ending. Seriously, it's shocking. With that in mind, I will keep my remarks on both the book and movie as far from spoiler territory as I can, because this story should be approached by newcomers just like I did, without any prior knowledge. Now that I know how it ends, I'm sure I'll never forget it, joining the ranks of such finales as those of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, Orient Express, and so on. All I'll say about the book right now is that no matter how many Agatha Christie novels I've read, and I've read quite a number at this point, I still have no interest in trying to outsmart the book. I am more than happy to be led around by the nose, start to get worried that Agatha Christie has given away the twist too soon, and then have the rug not pulled, but yanked out from under me in the closing pages. In case you're not aware, the story, generally, is this. A young man is tasked with assisting in the investigation into the murder of Aristide Leonides, an extremely wealthy old man. Amongst the suspects are everyone in his family, all of whom live under one roof, the roof belonging to the Crooked House of the title. So, after having read the book, I was even more excited to dive into the adaptation. And to sum up, it's a movie that is, admittedly, quite inconsistent in almost every aspect. The cinematography, the score, the production design, even the cast. There are aspects to every part of this movie that I think are spot on, perfect, and others that left me scratching my head. And yet, despite all that, I kind of loved it, which could be in part due to my newfound admiration for the source material, but I think it's just as much about what we see on screen. To start off, the cinematography by Sebastian Winterow. As the movie began, I started to get worried. All of the scenes in London, be they in Charles Hayward, the protagonist's office, or Scotland Yard, all of it was photographed handheld, in borderline shaky cam at points. And I thought, oh boy, here is some guy trying to modernize Agatha Christie, but as we transition to the Leonides family home, it does settle into more traditional, albeit neo-noir inspired cinematography. And at that point, I began to feel we were in safer hands. There is still the occasional off-kilter, very stylized shot, be that a shot from the ground straight up between Charles and the Sophia character while they're dancing, or an almost low-budget feeling shot, taken straight down a spiral staircase, as though the camera operator were cramped up in there trying to capture Terence Stamp and Max Irons in the same frame in this very awkward location. But to me, there was almost a charm to that, as though each location, or even each scene, was an opportunity to try something different, depending on the action or the characters that are playing within it. And speaking of those characters, as I said, there seems to have been an effort to make this as star-studded as they could, and for the most part, it works. The cast is headed off by Max Irons, son of Jeremy Irons, who I don't believe I've seen in anything before. And he was quite good. He has enough charisma as the hero of the story to hang the movie upon, while understanding that he almost always shares the screen with other, flashier characters, and often more experienced actors. His character of Charles is changed a fair bit from the book, as though the screenwriters, who include Julian Fellows of all people, seem to think that having just some guy do the investigating wasn't thrilling enough. So now he's made an actual working private detective. But not only that, he's also a former spy of some kind, already at this young age. Those Espionage connections are even the cause of his and Sophia's breakup, rather than being nearly engaged in the book. Speaking of spy connections, that's an addition made to the Aristide Leonides backstory, that he possibly has some CIA and/or mafia ties. This seems to have been added as another potential pool of suspects to pull from, but there isn't enough done with that side story in the movie to amount to much of anything, which it really doesn't need to. The family dynamics are far more interesting, and thankfully the movie does a pretty fair job of presenting that. Glenn Close plays Aunt Edith de Havilland, now the surviving elder person of power in the family, and hers is far and away the standout performance in the movie. She has an inner strength to her character and charm, but also hints of secrecy that make you question her intentions. And the way in which she takes command during the dinner scene, notably the one scene where every character is gathered for an extended period, is excellent. For the rest of the cast, there are some that are very good, such as Julian Sands as the eldest child of Aristide, temperamental and suspicious of Charles, Christian McKay, who is the devoted younger son, who in every scene shocked me with just how much of a face and voice match he is for Orson Welles, which makes me want to see the movie in which he played that exact part. Amanda Abington as Clemency, one of the daughters-in-law, the one that has no interest in the Leonides family fortune, and, as I mentioned, Terence Stamp, who makes a few brief appearances as Chief Inspector Taverner, and manages to draw your attention to him no matter how low-key his performance is. Honor Neefsey, I also have to mention, playing Josephine, the youngest granddaughter who is both Charles' rival in solving the murder and his irritant in not telling him all of the juicy gossip she knows about everyone in the house. The character is a very interesting one, and her dynamic with Charles is a major part of the novel, and she brings Josephine's precocious and rather unfeeling nature to life very well. Stephanie Martini plays Sophia, the oldest grandchild, and here, former girlfriend to Charles. The performance is fine, but they do lean a little too far into typical femme fatale territory. She even shows up at the PI office to try and drag Charles into the story, a la Mary Astor in The Maltese Falcon, and so many others that followed in her footsteps. It's well-trod ground for other authors' stories, so pushing that sort of noir trope into Agatha Christie feels out of place. The two characters that really didn't work for me were Gillian Anderson's Magda and Christina Hendricks as Brenda, the actress daughter-in-law and newest, youngest wife of Aristide, respectively. Gillian Anderson is outfitted with what I'm hoping is just a bad wig, and her performance isn't so much bad as it is thinly sketched. She's not given a lot to do, but then again, neither are most of the cast, but where they all have little moments to shine as they are systematically interrogated, her character of Magda sort of fades into the background, in a way that a vain actress type really shouldn't. That type of character should be much bigger in personality. As presented, she lacks much interest. And Christina Hendricks just seems miscast. Her voice and performance style just feel out of place for the era, that being 1957. She does have the sympathetic helplessness of the book's Brenda, but otherwise she typically took me out of it anytime they cut to her for a line. The locations are, again, very good and also rather strange. The house is made up of several locations. One for the exterior, which is the very imposing and magnificent Minley Manor, and several others for the interior. The entrance hall feels very typical for that sort of manor house, very grand and impressive with staircases and huge family portraits covering every wall, but then you get into the apartments that house each segment of the family, and the disparate styles of those rooms have both the effect of giving a bold, visual statement of the difference between each of these characters, and also making you feel like you're entering a different house altogether, which is likely true as well, from a behind-the-scenes standpoint. For Roger and Clemency, you have the cool whites and yellows of their living room that almost resembles a conservatory. For Philip and Magda, you have the more traditional bookcase-lined walls and wood paneling. And for Brenda, you have the bright, garish pink room, filled with modern furniture for the era. So while these wildly different styles almost go too far in demonstrating the very different households that all live together, they also do reinforce the idea that Aristide gave everyone whatever they wanted, and has done so for their entire lives. The score by Hugo de Cher is somewhat hit and miss. On the one hand, you have this great recurring motif that sounds a lot like a piece of the score from Skyfall, which plays very often while out on the grounds of the house or during a moody driving sequence. Or you have the diegetic rock and roll music of the era echoing from some other wing of the house as Charles wanders through these massive halls. But on the other hand, there are some portions of the score that feel as though they could pop up in a Lifetime TV movie, where it's trying so hard to underline an emotion or establish a tone that the actors and scene itself aren't bringing about naturally. Thankfully, the former far outweighs these moments, but when they happen, the lower budget of the movie becomes apparent. The 50s setting can feel somewhat inconsistent as well, in that there are shots that you could place in a 1930s Christie adaptation and they wouldn't feel out of place, and others that are going for a more 60s aesthetic. This could be intentional though, as the filmmakers say in the behind the scenes that they chose the late 50s as it was an era of change. The wealthy families and country manor life were giving way to the groovy 60s, as evidenced in the scenes where Charles and Sophia visit all kinds of rock music clubs while zipping around town on a motorcycle. But as I said at the beginning, there was something so fun about watching this movie, and I felt very forgiving of whatever faults there may be, simply because they were bringing an excellent story to life without miring it in all of the modern vices that seem to adorn a great many modern Agatha Christie films. Case in point, the Sarah Phelps adaptations. I've only seen 2 of them, and that's probably enough for me. Witness for the Prosecution I found just miserable to watch and had me longing for the 1957 original. As for And Then There Were None, while it nailed the tone of the novel early on and was beautifully shot, it quickly devolved into needless profanity, as all profanity is, drug-fueled party scenes, disgusting so-called love scenes, shoehorned in backstories that were invented to show how much you can get away with on TV these days, and an overall feeling of needing to take a shower after watching. In contrast, this movie has very little foul language. There are a couple of scenes that hint towards the risque, but they thankfully cut away before anything really is shown, and despite the dark ending, it's still a very enjoyable film. Speaking of, it does the ending very well. Even though there are several changes made, instead of just discovering a particular event through a letter, we witness it, as the finale almost becomes a car chase. The lead up to the climactic moment is honestly chilling, and I wish I could discuss the performances during that scene, but I'll stay strong and ask you all just to watch it instead. Crooked House was a real surprise and a treat for me. The story is one of the closest to resemble that of Hercule Poirot's Christmas, another book I love, with yet another dysfunctional family orbiting around a rich elderly patriarch who gets bumped off, and those types of family stories are always intriguing to me. I really haven't got a clue what the rest of the world thinks about this movie, whether it's seen as a hidden gem or a reviled disgrace to the Agatha Christie legacy. I haven't read anyone else's thoughts on it, but I'm very curious to find out. Either way, I've been looking for more newer Agatha Christie films that don't feel the need to dirty up or modernize their stories. So this is exactly what I was hoping for. I'd recommend it. Thanks so much for watching. Adios for now.